Neighbors heard screams. The tragedy no one expected. It was late. A Tuesday night in a quiet American suburb. The kind of neighborhood where porch lights glow softly, families feel safe, and everyone knows everyone. But on that night, safety shattered. Because at exactly 11:42 p.m., neighbors heard screams. The Parker family lived at the end of Willow Creek Lane. James Parker was a middle-aged accountant, always punctual, always polite. His wife Linda was a schoolteacher who baked cookies for the neighborhood kids. Their daughter Emily was just 16, a cheerleader with a bright future ahead of her. They weren't rich. They weren't famous. They were ordinary. And that made them feel untouchable. Until that night. The first call came from Mrs. Johnson across the street. She told 911 she heard a scream so sharp it cut through the walls. Moments later, another neighbor called. Then another. By the time police arrived, the street was silent. Too silent. Lights were off. Curtains were drawn. The Parker house stood in darkness. Officers knocked. No answer. They forced the door. What they found inside would never leave their minds. The living room was overturned. A coffee table smashed. Glass everywhere. In the kitchen, Linda Parker was found first, collapsed against the counter, with a single deep wound across her chest. James was upstairs, face down and motionless. But it was Emily that broke the officers' hearts. She was discovered in her bedroom, clutching her phone as if she had tried to call for help. Her final message was never sent. The Parker family was gone. The investigation began immediately. There was no forced entry. No signs of robbery. This wasn't random. Detectives combed through the family's lives. James had no enemies. Linda was loved by her students. Emily was a typical teenager. So who would want them dead? Then came the first twist. Neighbors reported seeing a figure that night standing in the Parkers' driveway, a man tall and silent. When officers checked the security footage from a nearby home, they saw him too. A hooded figure pacing, watching. And at one point, he turned to face the camera. But his face was hidden. Police released the footage to the public. Tips flooded in, dozens of names, dozens of possibilities. Then one name stuck. David Miller. A neighbor living just 2 houses away. David was quiet, kept to himself. Strange, but never violent, at least not in public. But when detectives questioned him, his story didn't add up. He claimed he was out of town that night. But his cell phone pinged right there on Willow Creek Lane. Still, there was no weapon. No direct evidence. Only suspicion. The community reeled. Fear spread. Children no longer played outside. Parents double-locked their doors. Because if the Parkers weren't safe, no one was. At the funeral, neighbors wept. 3 caskets stood side by side, a family buried together. But even there, whispers spread. Was David Miller a killer? Or was the real murderer still out there? Then came the twist no one saw coming. Forensic teams finally cracked Emily's phone. The unsent message she tried to send. It wasn't to 911. It wasn't to a friend. It was to her mother. 3 words. "He's inside now." The tragedy left scars. A family gone. A neighborhood broken. But the message raised more questions than answers. Who was he? How did he get inside without force? And why did Emily know him? Sometimes, the worst dangers aren't strangers in the dark. Sometimes they're closer. Much closer. So the question remained. What really happened inside the Parker home that night? Was it the quiet neighbor no one trusted? Or someone the family let in willingly? Someone they thought they knew? Because the Parker home was silent, but Emily's final message still echoed. "He's inside now." 3 words that turned a tragedy into a mystery. 3 words that raised one chilling question. Who was he? Detectives swarmed Willow Creek Lane. Day and night, the quiet neighborhood became a crime scene. Yellow tape lined the Parker home. Reporters stood shoulder to shoulder asking questions no one could answer. Was the killer a stranger? Or someone the family trusted? Inside the police station, detectives pinned photographs of the Parkers to a board, smiling faces from a family once full of life. Next to them was the grainy security footage. A hooded figure standing in the driveway, pacing and watching before disappearing into the night. Who was he? The first suspect was obvious. David Miller. David lived just 2 houses away. Quiet. Withdrawn. The kind of neighbor people noticed only because he kept to himself. When officers questioned him, his story cracked quickly. He claimed he was out of town on business the night of the murders. But his cell phone betrayed him. Tower pings placed him right there on Willow Creek Lane at the exact time of the screams. Neighbors recalled seeing a man in a dark hoodie near the Parker home. One even swore it was David. To detectives, he looked guilty. But guilt doesn't always mean proof. That's when investigators found something they didn't expect. On the back door of the Parker home, crime scene technicians lifted a fingerprint. At first, they thought it belonged to James Parker. But it didn't. It belonged to someone else. A man named Robert Kane. Robert Kane wasn't a neighbor. He wasn't family. He wasn't even from town. He was a drifter, a man who wandered from city to city with a record as long as his arm. Burglary. Assault. Trespassing. 3 years earlier, Robert had worked a construction job renovating homes. One of those homes was the Parker residence. Suddenly the pieces shifted. Robert knew the layout of the house. He had been inside before. He could have slipped in quietly without breaking a lock. Police tracked Robert down in a nearby county. He looked ragged, paranoid, the kind of man who never stayed in one place too long. When detectives brought him in, he denied everything. "I don't know those people," he muttered. "I've never been near their house." But his clothes told another story. His boots carried tiny shards of glass identical to the coffee table shattered inside the Parker living room. Investigators noticed something else. Smoke, burnt wood, burnt fabric. A search of his belongings revealed ashes, charred scraps of clothing. One piece of fabric bore a faded cartoon print. It matched Emily Parker's pajamas. The evidence felt damning. Robert Kane, a drifter with a violent past tied to the Parker home and their final night. The town erupted. Headlines screamed that a drifter had been arrested in the Parker murders. For a moment, it seemed like justice had been served. But something didn't sit right. Neighbors began whispering again. And one voice changed everything. Thomas Reed. He lived across the street. That night, he couldn't sleep. He told detectives he stood at his window and saw more than just a shadow. He saw 2 men standing in the Parker yard arguing. One of them was tall and wearing a hoodie. The other was shorter and stockier. But what froze Thomas's blood was the voice. He swore one of them was James Parker himself. The possibility shook investigators. If James was outside arguing with someone, then what happened next? Did he invite someone inside? Did he know the person who would kill him and his family? Was Emily's message, "He's inside now," not about a stranger breaking in, but about someone her parents willingly let through the door? The theory of a random drifter shattered. Robert Kane might have been there. But was he acting alone? Or was he just a pawn in something far darker? Detectives turned back to the Parkers' lives. That's when they uncovered something hidden. Emily's diary. The pages were filled with sketches, school notes, and teenage thoughts. But the final entry stopped detectives cold. Written 2 days before her death, Emily wrote. "He keeps watching me. I told Mom, but she says not to worry. It's someone we know." Emily wasn't afraid of a stranger. She was afraid of someone familiar. Someone close enough to watch her. Close enough to make her confide in her mother. And if Linda Parker dismissed those fears, what did she know? Who was she protecting? The Parker tragedy was no longer just about screams in the night. It was about secrets, whispers behind closed doors, and a danger much closer than anyone imagined. The town lived in fear. 3 coffins buried in the ground. 2 suspects behind bars. And still, no closure. Because with every answer came another question. And with every lead, the case grew darker. Next time, detectives uncover the truth hidden in James Parker's past, a truth that ties directly to Emily's final words. And when it comes out, the Parker tragedy will no longer look like a random act of violence. It will look like a plan. A plan years in the making. So ask yourself this. Who do you think Emily was writing about? The quiet neighbor who lied? The drifter with a violent past? Or someone even closer? Someone the Parkers thought they could trust? Because the screams heard that night were only the beginning.